The boy stood barefoot on the cold stone floor, his wrists tied with thin metal bands. The great hall around him echoed with the noise of voices, alien voices that spoke in rough, harsh tones he could not always understand. He was young, no more, than 16 by human years, thin from hunger and with eyes wide from fear. He had no name here, no family, no past. To the crowd, he was only a body, something to be sold. Bright lights burned above the stage, making him squint. He wanted to look down, but the guards forced him to keep his chin up. Their tall shadows loomed beside him, alien soldiers with gray skin and armor that clinked whenever they moved. The boy's heart thudded in his chest, and he felt as if the sound might be heard across the hall. The auctioneer, a creature with long arms and a voice like grinding stone, shouted out numbers. Each number was a price. Each price was a bid on his life. The alien's voice carried easily across the chamber, bouncing off the curved walls made of polished black stone. Rows of merchants sat on benches, some with glowing tablets to record their purchases, others with bags of coins clutched tightly in their hands. Strong back, young age unspoiled, the auctioneer barked in a mix of alien words and broken human tongue, useful for work or other purposes. Who bids? The boy flinched when a hand shot up from the crowd. A thick-bodied alien with red scales hissed out a number. The auctioneer nodded, repeating it loudly. Then another voice shouted higher, and another after that. The numbers climbed quickly. Each word that left their mouths cut into him like a knife. He wanted to cry out that he was not an object, not something to be bought or sold. But no sound came from his throat. His fear strangled him silent. He felt smaller and smaller as the voices grew louder, each one measuring his worth in coins instead of kindness. Some buyers looked at him with cold eyes, weighing him as if he were cattle. Others laughed, mocking the nervous way his hands shook. He wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. He thought of running, but the guard's heavy hands on his shoulders reminded him escape was impossible. The boy remembered faint pieces of his old life before he was brought here. A small human settlement at the edge of the colony. His mother's voice calling him at night, the smell of bread from the oven, his father's quiet strength. That life was gone, burned away when raiders came. He had been captured, dragged in chains, and carried from one place to another until he ended here, standing under the cruel gaze of strangers. The auctioneer slammed a rod on the floor. Last chance. Who bids higher? The hall fell quiet for a moment. The boy's breath caught. His heart raced. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to be pushed into the dark. Then a voice spoke. It was not loud, not sharp like the others. It was soft, firm, and almost tired. I will bid. The boy blinked and turned his head, searching for the speaker. In the crowd, a figure rose slowly from the bench. It was a human woman, old, her hair streaked with white, her back slightly bent. She wore plain work clothes patched many times over, and her hands looked rough and worn like they had seen years of labor in fields. A widow perhaps, though he did not know her story yet. The crowd erupted in laughter. Some aliens jeered, others whispered in amusement. A farmer? What does she want with him? One mocked. The auctioneer sneered, tilting its long head. Do you even have the coin, old woman? The widow reached into her bag and pulled out a pouch. The coins inside clinked softly as she set them on the table before her. It was not a fortune. It was not the highest bid. But it was real. Every coin had been earned through sweat, toil, and sacrifice. The auctioneer frowned. This is less than the last bid. I have no more, she said simply. Her voice was steady, though her face showed lines of age and hardship. But it is honest. Take it or leave it. The hall grew restless. Some buyers shouted protests, others demanded the auction continue. But the widow did not lower her eyes. She stood with quiet strength, her weathered hands resting on the pouch as if it carried more than money. It carried her will. The auctioneer hesitated. Perhaps the other buyers were growing restless. Perhaps the alien cared little for who owned. The boy, as long as the deal was done, With a wave of its hand, it signaled the guards. "Sold," it barked. "To the old farmer." The boy's knees weakened. He barely understood what had happened. The guards shoved him forward, releasing the bands from his wrists. His skin was sore where the metal had pressed, but he hardly noticed. He stumbled off the stage, following the widow's calm figure as she turned toward the exit. The crowd grumbled, but no one stopped her. She walked slowly, each step steady, as though she carried no shame for her choice. The boy followed behind her, confused, scared, but also curious. Why would this stranger spend her hard-earned coins on him? She could have bought tools, animals, or food. Why him? When they reached the outer gates, the guards pushed them through and slammed the doors shut behind them. The noise of the auction faded, leaving only the open air of the colony's outer road. The widow finally looked at him. Her eyes were sharp, but kind, like someone who had seen too much sorrow yet still chose mercy. "You don't belong in a cage," she said. "Come with me." The boy swallowed hard, his throat dry. He nodded, unable to find words. And so, under the burning light of twin suns, the boy walked beside the widow farmer, away from the place of chains and voices. He did not know what waited for him at her farm, or why fate had chosen this path. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. The road stretched long and quiet under the twin suns. Dust rose with each step as the widow farmer and the boy walked away from the noise of the colony's market. The boy kept his eyes low, afraid to speak, but his mind churned with questions. He wondered if this woman had bought him only to put him back into labor, or if she had some other reason. The widow carried herself with calm strength. Her shoulders were bent with age, yet her steps were steady. She did not look at him often, but when she did, her gaze was sharp, as if she could read every thought he was trying to hide. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "What's your name, child?" The boy hesitated. I don't know if I should say." His voice was soft, almost broken. The widow gave a short sigh. "Names are not for selling. They are for keeping. If you have one, speak it." He swallowed hard. "Eli. Eli," she repeated, tasting the word as though it belonged. "Good. A name should not be forgotten." They walked on until the road curved into rolling fields. The land was wide and open, filled with crops that swayed under the light breeze. Strange creatures, half like cattle and half like giant birds, grazed in the distance. The widow's farm came into view, a humble house with a patched roof, a barn leaning to one side, and fences made from old wood and scrap metal. To Eli, it looked almost like another world compared to the dark auction hall. When they reached the porch, the widow pushed the door open. Inside, the house was simple but warm. The floorboards creaked and the air smelled faintly of dried herbs. She pointed toward a small corner with a bed made of straw and cloth. "You'll sleep there," she said. "Not a cage, a bed. It is not much, but it is yours." Eli touched the blanket with trembling fingers. He had not slept in a bed since his capture. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he did not trust his own eyes. The widow set down her bag and went to the stove. She filled a pot with water and placed it over the fire. "Sit," she said. "You must eat. Work comes after food." Eli obeyed, sitting at the wooden table. His stomach growled as the smell of soup filled the air. When she placed a bowl before him, he hesitated again. Was this truly for him? She noticed his doubt. "Eat, child. I did not spend my coin to starve you." Slowly, Eli lifted the spoon. The soup was simple, roots, beans, and broth, but to him it tasted richer than any meal he had ever known in captivity. He ate quickly, almost forgetting his manners. The widow watched, but she did not scold him. She only gave a small nod. When the bowl was empty, she spoke again. "Tomorrow you will rise early. There is work to be done. Fields do not tend themselves, and animals do not feed on air." Eli's heart sank. Work. Of course, that was why she had bought him. But her next words surprised him. You are not a servant here, you are a helper. I am old and I cannot keep this farm alone. If you wish to stay, you must learn. If you do not wish to stay, you will tell me when the time comes. Until then, we will work together." Eli looked at her in confusion. No one had ever given him a choice before. He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. The next morning came early. The suns had barely risen when the widow shook him awake. She handed him a pair of worn boots and a wide-brimmed hat. "The field will not be gentle," she said. The day was long and filled with labor. Eli learned to pull weeds, to guide the plow behind a strange animal with horns like spirals, and to carry buckets of water from the well. His arms ached, his back burned, and his hands blistered. At times he wanted to collapse. But each time, he slowed. The widow was there, not with harsh words, but with steady guidance. "Stand tall. Do not hunch. Let the weight rest on your shoulders, not your spine." Or, "Steady the beast. Speak firm. Animals listen when you give them reason." Her voice carried no cruelty, only the patience of one who had lived long and learned much. At midday they rested under the shade of the barn. She shared bread with him, rough and dry but filling. They drank from the same jug of water, and Eli felt something stir inside him, a sense that he was no longer completely alone. Days turned into weeks. His body grew stronger. The blisters on his hands hardened into calluses. He began to rise before the widow called, eager to prove himself. He started to know the land, the way the crops leaned when they needed water, the sound of animals when they were hungry or sick, the smell of the earth when rain was near. At night, when the stars stretched endless across the sky, Eli would sit on the porch steps while the widow sat in her old chair. She told him stories of her husband, a man who had once dreamed of making the farm bigger, richer before he passed away. She spoke of hardships, the raids, the taxes, the loneliness, but also of small joys, harvest festivals, the birth of calves, the beauty of a field turning golden at sunset. Eli listened, caught between sorrow and comfort. For the first time, since his capture, he felt like he was part of something larger than his fear. One evening, after a long day of work, Eli asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why did you buy me?" The widow's eyes were quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Because I saw a child who should not be in chains. My own sons are gone. My house is empty. I did not want my last years filled with silence. You reminded me that life is still worth saving." Eli's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of him as worth saving before. From that night on, something changed between them. He began to call her ma'am. But in his heart, he felt she was something more, like the echo of a mother he had lost. She in turn grew softer in her ways, scolding him less and smiling more, though her smiles were rare and small. But not all days were peaceful. One afternoon, while working in the field, Eli saw smoke rising from the far ridge. Alien patrols often passed through, demanding tribute or searching for hidden weapons. The widow's face grew tight when she saw the smoke, though she said nothing. That night, Eli could not sleep. He looked at the tools in the barn, at the fences around the animals, and he thought of the chains he had worn. The farm was safe for now, but he wondered how long safety could last in a world ruled by others. Still, as he lay in his straw bed, he whispered to himself, "I will not go back. I will never go back." The farm, the widow, and the quiet stars above gave him something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. He was no longer just a boy from an auction. He was Eli, a farmhand, a helper, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could grow into more. The days passed and Eli's hands grew strong. The farm became a part of him, the soil beneath his nails, the sweat on his back, the ache in his muscles that came at the end of every day. Yet, even as he grew into this new life, a quiet unease stirred inside him. He could not forget the smoke he had seen on the ridge, nor the way the widow's face had hardened that day. The farm seemed peaceful on the surface, But Eli often sensed that the widow carried secrets heavier than the plow. One late evening, while the suns dipped low and the sky turned orange and purple, Eli worked inside the barn. The widow had gone to the house to prepare supper, leaving him to fix a broken hinge on the animal pen. He hammered the nail into place, but when he struck the wood too hard, the board split and revealed a hollow space underneath. Curious, Eli knelt down and pried the wood away with his hands. The space was dark and smelled of rust. He reached inside and pulled out something hard, wrapped in old cloth. When he unwrapped it, his breath caught. It was a weapon, small, heavy, and shaped like the pistols he had only heard about in whispers. Human-made, though aged and worn. Alongside it lay strange pieces of equipment. A cracked visor, a faded jacket with Earth's old insignia, and a datapad long out of power. Eli stared, his heart racing. Why would these things be hidden under the barn? The widow entered just then, carrying a lantern. She froze when she saw what he held in his hands. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then she set the lantern down and closed the barn doors firmly behind her. "You should not have found that," she said in a low voice. "I didn't mean to," Eli replied quickly. "I was only fixing the pen. The wood broke and..." Her face softened, though her eyes were sharp. She walked forward and gently took the weapon from his hands, wrapping it again in cloth. "These belong to my husband." Eli blinked. "Your husband was a soldier?" She nodded slowly. "Not just a soldier. He was part of the resistance. When the aliens first came, many humans fought back. He was one of them." Eli's chest tightened. He had heard stories whispered in the camps, tales of humans who dared to stand against alien rule, but he had thought they were only legends. "Why did you hide them?" he asked. "Because weapons bring danger," she said simply. "The patrols come often. If they found this, they would take the farm, the animals, and me. They would not leave you alive either. So I buried the past and chose to live quietly." Eli sat down on the straw, his thoughts tumbling. "But humans? We once fought back?" The widow studied him. "Yes. We were not always scattered and weak. There was a time when humans stood side by side, defending each other. My husband believed in that dream. He died believing in it." Her voice trembled slightly, though she quickly steadied herself. She placed the wrapped bundle back into the hollow and covered it again with the broken board. "Eli," she said, her tone firmer now, "you must promise me something. Do not speak of this to anyone. The world we live in now is not kind to those who carry hope. Hope makes us targets." But Eli's mind refused to rest. That night, as he lay in his bed, he thought about the boy he had been at the auction, the one who stood trembling while others shouted his price. He thought about the strength in the widow's hands and the weapon hidden under the barn. He thought about the stories of humans standing tall, refusing to bow, and for the first time, he felt pride. The next morning, Eli rose early. He helped with the animals, carried water, and worked the fields as always, but his thoughts kept returning to the resistance. Finally, as the sun set, he gathered his courage and spoke. "Ma'am," he said, standing at the doorway of the house, "will you teach me?" The widow looked up from her chair. "Teach you what?" "Teach me what you know. Not just farming. I want to learn what your husband knew. I want to learn how to be strong like him." She sighed and shook her head. "Eli, you are young. You do not understand what you are asking. Fighting brings pain. Fighting takes lives. Farming brings food. And food brings peace. But peace does not last," Eli argued softly. "I saw the patrol smoke. They will come again. What if one day they take the farm? What if they take you? I cannot stand by like I did at the auction. I want to be ready." The widow studied him for a long time. Her eyes, tired but wise, searched his face. Finally, she said, "You are stubborn, just like my husband was." She rose slowly from her chair and walked to the shelf. From it, she pulled an old wooden staff worn smooth from years of use. "If you must learn," she said, handing it to him, Then we begin with this. Not with weapons, with discipline. A strong heart, steady hands, and patience, those come before blades or fire. Eli gripped the staff, feeling its weight. Yes, ma'am. The training began at dawn. The widow showed him how to hold the staff, how to balance his stance, how to strike and block. His arms grew sore, his legs burned, and his grip often slipped. But she never raised her voice, never mocked him. Each mistake was met with calm correction. Strength is not only in the arm, she told him, it is in the mind. If your fear controls you, you are already beaten. When the farm work ended, the training continued. Day after day, Eli pushed himself. He learned to carry heavy loads without stumbling, to steady his breathing even when his body screamed for rest, to stay alert to every sound in the night. Slowly, his movements grew sharper. His body grew leaner, his gaze more certain. In the quiet hours after practice, the widow told him stories, not only of her husband's battles, but of the hope that had once united humans. She spoke of a time when humans built ships that crossed the stars, when they carved out homes with their own strength instead of being ruled. Eli listened with wide eyes. He began to dream, not only of surviving, but of one day helping others survive too. One night, as the stars burned bright overhead, he whispered to himself, I am not a thing to be sold. I am not a weak boy. I am human. The farm became more than a place of work. It became his training ground, his school, his home. And the widow, once just a stranger who had saved him, became his teacher. Yet beneath this new strength, Eli knew the world outside their farm had not changed. The patrol still roamed. The merchants still traded lives. The aliens still ruled. But now, when he thought of them, he did not feel only fear. He felt ready. The farm had grown quiet again. The days passed with the rhythm of life, feeding animals at dawn, plowing under the hot suns, training with the staff when the work was done. Eli's body had become stronger, his steps lighter, his gaze sharper. The widow sometimes watched him from the porch as he practiced in the yard. Her lips pressed in a faint smile that she quickly hid whenever he looked her way. But peace never lasted long in a world ruled by others. It began with whispers in the market. One afternoon, the widow returned from town with a tense look on her face. She placed her sack of grain on the table and sat heavily in her chair. Eli noticed her silence and asked what troubled her. The merchants are talking, she said. They know I took you from the auction. They say I paid too little coin. They say I am hiding something. Eli frowned. But you did nothing wrong. Wrong has little meaning to those who hold power, she replied. They grow jealous when someone defies their rules even in small ways, and jealousy draws attention. Her words unsettled Eli, but he tried to bury the worry beneath his training and work. Still, he noticed how often she looked to the horizon now as if expecting something to appear. 2 weeks later, it did. It was morning when Eli first heard the sound. Distant engines humming like angry bees. He set down the bucket of water he was carrying and looked to the ridge. A thin line of smoke trailed in the sky. Moments later, shapes appeared. 3 patrol carriers, sleek and black, their wings sharp against the light. Eli's stomach tightened. Patrols, he whispered. The widow came out of the house, her face pale but steady. She carried herself with calm, though Eli could see the tension in her hands. Stay close, she said. The carriers descended into the fields beyond the farm, stirring dust and bending crops with their thrusters. From their bellies, soldiers marched out, tall aliens in armor, their weapons glowing faintly. They moved with practiced steps, spreading across the yard until the farm was surrounded. One of them, clearly the leader, stepped forward. His voice was cold as he spoke in broken human tongue. Widow, we come with questions. The widow kept her head high. Then ask. The leader's eyes narrowed. The market says you bought a boy who was not worth the price. Where is he? Eli's heart pounded. He stood just inside the barn door, watching. Every part of him wanted to rush forward, but the widow's firm glance told him to wait. "I took him," she admitted calmly. "He works here now. He is no different from any farmhand." The soldiers hissed in amusement. "A farmhand? A boy? Like that is worth more than dirt work. Perhaps you hide something else, weapons, secrets?" The leader's eyes swept the barn, the house, the fields. The widow stood her ground. "You may search. You will find nothing but soil and sweat." At her words, the soldiers began to spread out, pushing open doors, overturning barrels, kicking at fences. Animals bellowed in fear. The leader kept his gaze fixed on her, as if trying to read the truth from her wrinkled face. Eli's hands clenched. He could not stand idle while they tore apart the farm. His training echoed in his mind. Patience, steady breathing, courage. He moved quietly, slipping out the back of the barn, circling toward the fields where two soldiers were searching near the machinery. He grabbed a loose rope from the fence and waited until one of them bent over the irrigation pump. Then, with swift hands, he looped the rope around the soldier's legs and yanked hard. The alien crashed to the ground with a thud. Before the second could react, Eli swung a wooden beam, knocking the weapon from its hands. The creature snarled, but Eli darted back, leading them away from the barn. The widow saw what he was doing, but she did not cry out. Instead, she stepped closer to the leader, keeping his attention fixed on her. "Why waste your time here? There are bigger farms, richer lands. Do not harass an old woman who has nothing." But the leader was not fooled so easily. His gaze snapped toward the fields where the struggle broke out. Soldiers shouted, weapons hummed, and Eli sprinted between rows of crops, drawing them away. "Boy," the leader barked. "So he is here." The widow's heart tightened, but she did not break. "He is only a child. You waste your time chasing shadows." Meanwhile, Eli's lungs burned as he ran, but his mind was clear. He led the soldiers toward the machinery near the irrigation ditch. The old plow, heavy and rusted, sat on the edge. He remembered how the widow had taught him to use weight against resistance. He grabbed the lever and released it, sending the plow crashing down. The machine toppled, blocking the path and sending dust into the air. The soldiers stumbled, coughing and cursing in their tongue. Eli darted into the ditch, hiding among the reeds until their footsteps thundered past. His heart raced, but his lips curved into a small, determined smile. He was no longer the helpless boy from the auction. Back at the farmhouse, the leader finally grew impatient. He signaled to his men to return. "Enough. We will come again. If we find you lied, old woman, your farm will burn." The widow bowed her head slightly but said nothing. She stood silent as they marched back to their carriers, their engines roaring as they lifted into the sky and vanished beyond the ridge. When Eli returned, covered in dirt and sweat, the widow was waiting on the porch. She looked at him long and hard, her expression unreadable. Then at last she spoke. "You disobeyed me," she said. Eli lowered his eyes. "I couldn't let them take everything. I couldn't stand by." Her silence stretched until he feared she might be angry, but then she sighed deeply. "You are brave, Eli. Too brave for your own good. But perhaps it is time I stop pretending the world will leave us alone." She placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. "My husband believed humans could fight back. I tried to bury that hope, but you brought it back to this farm. Maybe that is not a mistake." Eli's chest swelled with pride. For the first time, she did not see him as just a boy she had saved. She saw him as something more. That night, as the stars spread across the sky, the widow and Eli sat together on the porch. The farm was quiet again, but both knew the peace was fragile. The patrols would return. The world beyond their fences would not stay away forever. Yet Eli did not feel fear. He felt ready. The widow's farm was not just a place of work anymore. It was a place worth protecting. And if the world came to take it, he would stand in its way. The farm felt different after the patrol's visit. Though the soldiers had left without taking anything, their threat hung in the air like a storm waiting on the horizon. Eli worked harder than ever, fixing broken fences, repairing the old machinery, and sharpening tools. The widow watched him, sometimes with pride, sometimes with worry. She knew that once attention had been drawn to her quiet farm, peace would not last. For Eli, however, something had changed deep inside. He no longer saw himself as the frightened boy who once stood on the auction block. The farm had shaped him. The widow had shaped him. Every drop of sweat, every blister, every lesson had turned him into something new, someone stronger. Still, he sensed the widow carried more secrets. Late one evening, when the stars were bright and the fields lay silent, she called him into the barn. She held a lantern in one hand, its flame flickering across her lined face. "Eli," she said quietly, "it is time you know everything." She led him to the corner where the boards had once been pried open. With steady hands, she removed the cover and pulled out the old bundle again. Inside were the weapons, the visor, and the faded jacket marked with Earth's insignia. This time, she did not hide them. She laid them out carefully before him. "My husband did more than farm," she began. "He helped build something greater, a hidden network, a resistance across the colonies, humans who refused to kneel." Eli stared at the items, his chest tightening. "Did he fight with these?" The widow nodded. "Yes, he fought, and he bled, and in the end, he gave his life to protect others. Before he died, he made me promise to guard these things. He said one day they might matter again. I did not believe him then. I only wanted peace." Her gaze shifted to Eli, steady and unflinching. "But now I see why he asked it of me. You were not brought to this farm by chance. You were meant to find these. You were meant to carry on what he could not finish." Eli's breath caught. "Me? But I am only one boy." "Every fighter begins as one," she said softly, "and every flame begins as a spark." She rose slowly and walked to the back of the barn. With a grunt, she pushed aside a pile of hay, revealing a trapdoor made of metal. She lifted it open, and the sound of old hinges creaked into the night. "Come," she said. Eli followed, his heart racing. The steps led down into a hidden chamber beneath the barn. Dust coated the walls, but the space was wide enough to hold something incredible. A small starship, old and patched with metal plates, but intact. Its wings folded close, its nose tilted slightly downward. Beside it lay crates filled with spare parts, sealed food packs, and maps stored in faded cases. Eli's mouth fell open. You've been hiding this?" The widow's voice was calm. "My husband built it with his comrades. When the resistance fell apart, he brought it here. He told me to guard it until the right moment. I thought the right moment would never come. But now," she placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, "now I believe it has." Eli stepped closer to the ship, his fingers brushing against its cold surface. His reflection shimmered faintly in the metal. He could hardly believe it was real. This was not just a vessel, it was freedom. "Ma'am," he whispered, "what do you want me to do?" Her eyes softened. "I want you to choose. You may stay here with me, work the land, and live a quiet life. Or you may take this ship and seek others like you, others who still dream of freedom. Whatever you choose, I will not hold you back. But I must warn you, once you leave, there is no turning back. The world outside will test you harder than the fields ever did." Eli's hands trembled. For so long, he had dreamed only of surviving, of not being chained again. But now, standing before the ship, he realized he wanted more. He wanted to protect the widow, to protect people like her. He wanted to fight so no other child would stand on a stage waiting to be sold. "I cannot stay," he said firmly. "Not while others live as I once did. I will return, I promise, but first I must see what lies beyond." The widow's eyes glistened, though she held back her tears. "Then you are ready." The next days were filled with preparation. Eli repaired what he could on the ship, using spare parts the widow had kept hidden. She showed him old maps of human settlements, whispered names of people who might still carry the fire of resistance. At night they sat on the porch, speaking little, each treasuring the quiet before change. On the morning of his departure, the skies were pale and the fields glistened with dew. Eli stood before the ship, wearing the faded jacket of the widow's husband. It was a little too large, but it fit him in spirit. Around his waist hung the staff she had trained him with, now polished smooth. The widow stood beside him, her hands folded in front of her. "Eli," she said, "you were not born my son, but in my heart you became one. Whatever you face out there, remember what you learned here. Strength is not in anger, but in patience. Courage is not in shouting, but in standing firm. And hope is what makes us human." Eli swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I will not forget." She gave him a small bundle of bread, dried fruit, and seeds. "Take this, a farmer's gift. Wherever you go, may it remind you of home." Eli placed the bundle inside the ship and turned back to her. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, with trembling hands, he embraced her. She stiffened at first, but then her arms wrapped around him, strong despite her age. When they pulled apart, her eyes shone with quiet pride. "Go, child. The stars are waiting." Eli climbed into the cockpit. The controls were old but familiar, as if waiting for human hands to guide them again. He pressed the ignition and the ship rumbled to life, dust swirling in the barn around them. The widow stepped back, raising one hand in farewell. With a deep breath, Eli pulled the lever. The ship rose slowly, breaking through the roof panels that fell away like leaves. The morning sky opened wide above him, endless and bright. From the window, he saw the widow's small figure standing firm on the ground, her hand still raised. She did not wave wildly, did not cry out. She only stood with quiet strength, the same strength that had carried him from chains to freedom. The farm grew smaller beneath him, the fields turning to green patches, the house to a dot. Yet Eli felt no sadness. He felt only determination. He was not leaving forever. He was carrying the farm with him, in his heart, in his spirit. As the stars called him forward, Eli whispered to himself, "I was once a boy on the auction block, but now I am more. I am human, and I will fight for us." The ship streaked upward, cutting across the sky, vanishing into the unknown. On the ground, the widow stood alone, but her lips curved into a small smile. For she knew she had not just saved a boy, she had lit the spark of something greater, a new beginning.